It's with my great pleasure, and this should be a real treat, that I introduce Pete Gustin.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So my story starts when I was born. We're going to go all the way back. I was born with perfect eyesight, but we noticed a problem, and it took until about third grade for us to notice this problem. The problem was, in third grade, everybody's usually creeping farther and farther back in the classroom so that they can talk to their friends about the latest Nintendo games or which girls have what cooties. But I was creeping further and further up and closer and closer. And the reason is I couldn't see the chalkboard anymore. And that's not a big deal. The teachers kind of figured out, okay, Pete's got a problem with his eyes, he's just going to need some glasses. So they went and told my mother, we think your son needs glasses. And that was easy because my mother worked in the school. So my mom and dad started taking me to different ophthalmologists. 1, 2, 3 of them. They all said, your eyes are fine. And so we went to 4, 5 ophthalmologists. The 6th one finally sat us down after the examination, said to my father, Mr. Gustin, do you work? My dad said, yes. Mrs. Gustin, do you work? She said, yes, I work in the school. Peter, do you have any brothers and sisters? I said, no, I'm an only child. Had no idea what this had to do with anything. But the guy had come up with the answer. He said that there was absolutely nothing wrong with my eyes whatsoever. I just wanted attention. Because when you're in third grade, the coolest way to get attention is to be the kid with glasses. Right. Well, my parents didn't believe this guy, and they kept looking for an answer. And eventually we ended up at the Mass Eye and Ear, where I went in for an entire day of testing. Got there at 9 in the morning, didn't leave until 6 in the afternoon because they were poking and prodding and taking blood and injecting me with dye and making me stare at strobe lights and making me do color tests, which I failed miserably. And they even stuck contact lenses on my eyes connected to wires to measure how much electricity my eyes could withstand. I don't know. I was a little kid and it was brutal. And at the end of the thing, the doctor came out of his office and he opened the door and he said, Gustin boy. That was me. That was Gustin boy. He said, you have macular degeneration. And that was the first time we'd heard the words. And he told me that my central eyesight would continue to deteriorate over the course of my entire life. Probably wouldn't have any left as my age went on. He said, but I would probably, and I do remember probably, maintain some peripheral vision. Then he turned around and went back into his office. And that was the entire extent of the diagnosis. Because we came to find out from one of his aides, he was writing a paper on macular degeneration and didn't want to tell us too much until he published the paper. As if I, at 8 years old, was going to go out and beat him to the punch and write the paper. Gotcha. But my parents and I, we hopped in the car, we went back home, we tried to log onto the internet and Google what the heck macular degeneration was, except it was 1985 and there was no internet and no Google. So we went to the Encyclopedia Britannica and tried to look up macular degeneration. Once again, strikeout, nothing in there. So we had a couple of words, long words, didn't really know what it meant, but that was the diagnosis. And a couple of weeks later, someone from the state showed up at the house. My father was at work, my mother sat down with her in the living room, and I sat in the next room playing with my Lincoln Logs. And the woman sat down and said to my mother, this was a phrase that I remember very specifically, we at the state understand that it's going to be a burden raising a disabled child. A very, very difficult phrase to hear for me as a kid because I just heard 2 things. One, I was going to be a burden to my parents. And the second was, I was disabled. I was having trouble in school seeing the chalkboard, and now I'm disabled. That's how they viewed me. She said, but don't worry, we in Massachusetts understand what the burden this is going to be, and we're going to do everything we can to help out. We'll give him special attention, we'll give him aid, and we'll make him comfortable. And a little bit of backstory. I am an only child. I have 2 cousins, one named Jim, one named Mike. They are 8 and 9 years older than me, lived in the same town, and I grew up with them as my older brothers. I got diagnosed, Jimmy got into Harvard. The next year, my cousin Mike got into MIT. So here's what's going on in life. My cousin gets into Harvard, my other cousin gets into MIT, I get diagnosed with macular degeneration. My mother gets all of this information and makes a decision at that point which probably changed the rest of my life. She did not say, no way are my sister's kids going to the Ivies and my kid's going to sit around on state aid. That's not happening. So she turned the woman down for her advice, or for her offer. She actually, on the way out, said, your son's not going to be able to stay in regular school. He's not going to be able to go to college, forget about Harvard, and he won't probably be able to maintain a regular job. This was 1985, and this was the thinking back then. And she strongly urged my mother to take her up on the offer of aid. My mother turned it down, kept me in school. So I started getting some help from organizations like the Mass Commission for the Blind. All of my textbooks became large print textbooks. And when I was sitting at the front of the classroom, I still couldn't see the chalkboard, but we would have the teachers, great teachers at Winchester High School, or elementary school at the time, would say, if they wrote something down, they'd say it. Easy compensation. Wasn't very hard for them to do. As I got into junior high school and high school, as I continued in regular school, I couldn't see the large print books anymore, so we went to books on tape. Did everything on tape. So I ended up going through elementary, junior high school, graduated and did go, yes, to Boston University. It wasn't Harvard, I know, Jimmy beat me there. But I had more fun. At that time, I did develop an interest in radio. I mean, that actually started one night when I went to bed and said, good night, Mom, good night, Dad, because I was a little kid. And woke up the next morning and said, what's for breakfast? There was no Peter Brady phase for me. I just sounded like this. I woke up one day and I was a man. Voice-wise. Nothing else happened that night. But people used to say, oh, you have a voice for radio, you should be in radio. So I kind of had an inkling that that might be what I wanted to do for a living. And when I got to college, I took an internship at WRKO, which is where I knew someone. I was working for Howie Carr, the late Jerry Williams, the late Andy Mose. I was working for some really cool people that I used to listen to, and my dad especially used to listen to. And it was a great opportunity for me. And I started in promotions, but quickly moved over to programming, because I wanted to be on air very badly. And I started learning my way around the studio, which is slightly difficult because there's a lot of buttons, a lot of knobs, a lot of things to turn. And back then it wasn't computers, it was all CDs and carts. And there was a lot of things going on visually. So I would work in that studio overnight. I would go to school at Boston University throughout the day. I would do a regular internship in the evening. And then I would stay there at night from midnight till 6 a.m. And I would learn my way around that studio. I would be trying to memorize where the CDs were, where the sounds were, where the knobs were, how to turn things up, how to turn things down. And I became very, very proficient in the studio. Before I actually got the internship, if I can step back a minute, I had an extraordinarily ignominious start into the world of broadcasting. It was a massive failure on my part, and something that I promised myself I would never do again. I was a freshman, and before I got the job, the internship at RKO, I tried to get an internship at WBCN. And I showed up to that interview I guess, unprepared. Something that someone with a disability such as mine, such as yours, should never do. We're in a sighted world, and in order to function with the sighted people, you have to prepare. Before I go out to a restaurant, if I know I have to make an impression, if I'm going for a business meeting, I will go there a day ahead of time, 2 days ahead of time. I'll find out where the bathroom is. When I go to any restaurant, I like to look at the menu ahead of time so I know what I'm ordering, so I don't have to ask for help. These are things that I've learned over time help me to function and not look and stand out and be different. Now that is something that I screwed up royally when I went to WBCN, and it almost completely knocked me out of my entire career path. Because I showed up and I said, I want to be an intern, and the woman said this to me, fill this out. 3 words that sent me into a panic. I wasn't ready for it. Now, if I'd called ahead and I knew I had to fill something out, maybe I would have come up with a game plan, but I didn't. And I panicked and I broke out into a cold sweat and I said, I've actually got a class, I'll go fill this out later. And so I ran home to my dorm room and I grabbed my pocket magnifier, which I always carry with me, little pocket magnifier, and I looked at the paper and there were only 3 words on it. There was only 3 words, name, phone number. Now again, if I was prepared, I probably could have written my name and phone number down, but I wasn't ready. So like a day later, I brought it back with my name and phone number and nobody ever called. So I didn't get that internship. But when I did end up at WRKO, I was extraordinarily thrilled for the opportunity, and I was not going to let it slip away. That's why I worked so hard in that studio, trying to make myself a valuable asset, working to learn where everything was, because once you know where everything is in a studio, that's my world. When I work, I'm working in a studio, and sighted people are funny, because even when they know where something is, they still look at it. I mean, it's right where it was, 5 minutes ago. For me, I'm looking at a board with 25 faders on it. They're all an inch apart. They're all 1.5 feet in front of me. None of them got up and ran away. They're all in the same spot. But I watch sighted people continually go, where's the fader I want? Oh, there it is. And they put their finger on it and move it. Now, the way I became proficient in the studio, I still have some sight, and back then I had more. Literally with my eyes closed, I could work that studio faster than any sighted person. And I became extremely good at my job. And this was about the time also that I was introduced to a friend of a friend who knew Rick Dees, if any of you know who he is. Oh, yeah. Morning show host out in Los Angeles. Now, Rick was heavy into the comedy. He loved doing comedy bits. And this friend of a friend introduced me to him and said, this guy sounds like Don. Who Don was Don LaFontaine, the movie trailer guy, the movie trailer guy. He has since passed, but he's the one that everybody thinks of in a world. That's Don. And so what Rick would do with me is we would come up with funny parodies of the movies that were out. One week, Don LaFontaine would do the movie trailer for Lake Placid, where it's hard to believe what's in the water. And the next week, I'd go into a studio, someone would feed me the lines, and I'd say, Lake Flaccid, where there's nothing hard in the water at all. So I had a lot of fun doing that, and I decided this voiceover thing is pretty cool. And I started wanting to go on auditions. I wanted to go to different studios in Boston and audition with copy. Now, as you can imagine, before I even get to this point of the story, reading copy was really hard because, again, I had some eyesight. I couldn't read the pages like anybody else. In an audition, you usually walk in, they hand you the copy, you look at it for a second, and you go. That's what I watched all my peers do. One after another. Walk in, grab the copy, read, go home. What I would do, in order to not make that same mistake that I made at WBCN in 1995, was I would get there 20, 30 minutes ahead of time, and I would get the copy, and I would excuse myself and go to the bathroom. And I would take my magnifier, and I would read the copy, one word at a time, until I started getting it, a sentence at a time, until I started getting a paragraph, until I finally committed it to memory. And I would go into the studio, again, having watched all my peers just pick it up and easily blow right through it and go about their business. I had it committed to memory and didn't want to stand out. I would hold the paper at what I thought was a normal holding paper length, and I would scan my eyes back and forth as if I was reading the copy. So that if these people didn't pick me, the only reason would be that they didn't like my voice. I didn't want to stand out. And there was a reason for that, which I didn't even know, but I would learn a couple years later, after I graduated Boston University. And I got through in a hurry. I got through in 3.5 years because I really wanted to get into voiceovers and radio. I just wanted to be done with school. I was studying neurological psychology, and I don't know what the heck I was doing. So I want to do this radio thing. I'm sick of brain tests. And so I graduated, I packed up my stuff, and I went down to New York, and I had national recognition for parodying Don LaFontaine. And I was doing well with my auditions. I was booking things here and there. And here I was, this 21-year-old kid, that's a kid in the voiceover industry by any stretch of the imagination, and the people in New York wanted to meet me. Who's this kid that's doing these voices? Well, another friend of mine who also knew this agent told him about my eyesight. I never asked him why. I think it comes up. It just comes up in conversation. But as it turned out, it was a total sandbagging. I, again, was blindsided, pardon the pun. As I walked into his office, he didn't listen to my reel. He didn't want to discuss my past, my future, my passions, my work. Didn't want to do anything except for throw a packet of paper at me, which hit me in the chest, so I happened to catch it. It was a 17-page document. I will never forget anything from this meeting. 17 pages hit me, and he said, so, say I get this job for you. It's Showtime. It was the network, Showtime. He said that they read a month in advance, and they'll send you a packet of paper just like this. And you're going to have to read it in the studio with direction, with the producers, all there, everybody there. How are you going to do it? And again, for the second time in my life, I was caught unprepared. I did not expect that question. When I was doing the movie trailer parodies, I was doing literally 1, 2, 3 lines at a time. and someone would say them to me, and I'd repeat them back. And when I went to my other auditions, you're memorizing 15, 30, at the most 60 seconds. At the most 60 seconds of copy. And this guy just threw 17 pages at me. Now, I might have been able to come up with some sort of an answer if I'd had a minute or two to think about it, but I was on the spot in the biggest agency with the biggest agent in the world, and I hesitated, and the hesitation was probably about this long, and that was the end. That was the end. He looked at me and he said, listen, sorry, there's 100,000 people outside that door right now that have voices as good as you and maybe not as good as you, but what they don't bring to the table is a problem. And you're bringing a problem to the table, and you don't have an answer. And he stood up, did not shake my hand, showed me the door, exited. Again, voiceover career over. Because I had graduated school thinking I was going to move to New York and become a voiceover guy. That was my path. That's what I wanted to do. And this guy just showed me the door. And a lot of people now, they look at me and what I've been able to fortunately do in this business, and they go, oh, that must have been the point where you said, oh, I'll show that guy, I'll go make it in this business, and I'll throw it in his face. That is not what happened even remotely. I was 21 years old. I was not very prepared for the world, and certainly not prepared to be shut down. That's a point in your life when you're trying to find your way and get on the rails to go to the rest of your life. And I was just completely derailed, knocked over, thrown into flames. It was a mess. And so I got to the streets of New York and I found an alley and I started bawling. I was 21 years old. I thought I was a man, but I was sitting there bawling in an alley in New York because this guy just told me I was never going to make it. And I didn't know what else I wanted to do, if I could do anything. I mean, as a legally blind guy, I have my college degree, but I can't even take a job at 7-Eleven. I'd be the worst teller ever. I didn't have a lot of options, at least I didn't think. But I did have the skills that I learned at the radio station in the production room. And I had been doing a lot of writing for Rick Dees. My production skills were great, and my voice had developed. So I came back to Boston, not being the voiceover pro that I wanted to be, but I took a job as the creative services director for WEEI and WRKO. Which, if the story ended there, would still be a pretty cool thing for a kid that was told at 8 years old I'd never even make it through elementary school. I became the creative services director of two of the biggest stations and one of the biggest radio markets in the country. Great, that was cool, that was awesome, but I wanted to be a voiceover guy. And technology had started to evolve, the internet started to speed up. This is relevant because up until then, you used to have to go into the auditions, where I'd go into the bathroom and memorize stuff. But when the internet sped up and you could send MP3s out, I would get copy sent to me via email. And I'd blow it up on my monitor, 40, 50, 60, 70-point font, 2 words on the page, on the screen at a time. And I would read it once, twice, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10 times until I had it committed to memory. And then I'd take pauses in between as I was letting my eyes refocus. And after 40 minutes or so, I could read 1 page of copy. And I had a good voice. And after 40 minutes of working on a page of copy, I could bang it out. Now, my peers, my voiceover peers that were working in their home studio, get a page, read it in 60 seconds, edit it, send it out, done. 2 minutes, done, page. I was 40 minutes. And I started thinking, again, maybe this guy was right. Maybe I'm not going to be able to make it in this business because I can't compete. You don't get a whole day's worth of salary by reading 1 page. You got to read a lot of stuff. And I wasn't able to keep up. I had 2, 3, 4 stations, and I started thinking once again, crap, maybe I'm not going to be able to make it in this business. But then another piece of technology came out, completely unrelated to anything, that ended up helping me in a very strange and circuitous way. It was texting, which I was unable to do for a very long time when it first came out. So much so that I went down to Verizon, to the store, walked in, told the people I didn't want to pay $4.95 a month for stupid texting anymore because I couldn't read the texts on my phone. And the guy said, don't worry about it, just press the pound button. And so I had a text open on my LG NV2 phone, and we hit the pound button, and it read it to me out loud. And I was like, oh, sweet, now I can text. It didn't really help me with my voiceover career at the time, but I could text, fantastic. Something to do while I'm not working. And maybe a week or so later, I was in the back seat of a friend's car, 2 guys up front, it was late, and I got a text. And as the text was being read to me, I said out loud to them, Red Sox win in extra innings, walk-off home run, David Ortiz, final score, 8-7. Cool. And then I put the phone down, I put it back in my pocket, and we went out for the rest of the night. And I woke up the next morning and I said, wait a minute, I was just given information and recited it back to my friends. Because at this point, my eyes were not reliable. I just, 40 pages to get through, or 40 minutes to get through one page of copy was unacceptable, not working, not gonna work in the workflow. But I got that little bit of information and relayed it in real time, and it clicked in my head. I was like, wait a minute, maybe this will work. And that's when I started to develop this audio prompter system where I wear a pair of headphones, and on one ear, I have a computer voice talking to me. And I let it get about 2, 3, 4 seconds ahead of me, probably 4 or 5 actually. I let it get ahead of me, and I start taking in that information, what it's saying to me, and I recite it back. And at first, it was maddening, because I've got this awful computer voice in my head saying, "You're listening to Sports Radio 93.7 WEEI." And you got this voice in your head, and it's like, I want to say, "You're listening to Sports Radio." It's like, I'm like, well, that doesn't work. That makes me sound terrible. So I had to learn to get that information in my head, in my ear, and just take it as information. Forget that it was a female computer voice. Forget the pacing, the bizarre iambic pentameter that programmed into the thing. Just take the information, take the words, and then spit them out. We call ourselves voice actors because we are acting, and they want us to act. They don't want us to just blurt the words out like a computer would. And so I started working on it. A year went by, 2 years went by, and after 2 years of work, because again, I didn't think I had a lot of options, and this was also something I really, really wanted to do. And I had a lot to live up to. I mean, these 2 cousins of mine were always looming figures in my life. My cousin Jimmy was put in charge of a very big company, moved to Dallas, and he was like 24 and put in charge of a massive company called Guardsmark. And my cousin Mike went to MIT and was developing new hard drives for Seagate. And they were both all-American sailors, they were captains of their soccer teams, and always had to live up to these guys. And back in high school, I wanted to be like them. Jimmy was class president, I wanted to be class president. They were captains of the swim team, I wanted to be captain of the swim team, and I was. But there was always this looming, do more, live up to them. And so I started working really hard at this audio prompter. I wanted to be a voiceover guy. It was a goal, and I'll tell you, I was gifted to know that I had something that I wanted to do. And I was thankful that I was given the drive and the surroundings in my life and the family support to push through and want to do it. So I started to become pretty good. I actually got it down to where everybody else was doing it, 60 seconds for one page. Maybe 90 seconds if I had to edit it together. But I went from 40 minutes down to 60 or 90 seconds. Huge, life-changing, career-changing opportunity for me to have learned that ear prompter system. And so now that brings us, I know I did my whole life here, I started when I was born. Now it takes us to last August, 36 years later. And I'm up for a really big job, very big job. And the person I'm going against is represented by, of all people in the whole world, this guy who 15 years earlier told me I'd never make it in the business. That it's me and this other guy going for the same job. And the agent, here, you think you want to get into voiceovers? I'll tell you how cutthroat it is. This agent calls up the people that are in charge and says this to them on the phone. Pete Gustin has a disability that makes it difficult for him to do his job, and he is unreliable. Go with my guy. That's how this business is. I mean, we're talking for a living. A lot of people can talk for a living, so when you have an edge, you take it. And that was his edge. That was the way to knock me out of the way. And I found this out on a Friday evening, and again, I was devastated. And I was going to try and tell them over the phone what I did for a living, and I said, you know what? Watch your emails. I'm gonna send you something. So I woke up the next morning on a Saturday, went into my studio, I sat down in front of a camera, I said, hi, my name is Pete Gustin. I'm a voiceover guy, and I'm legally blind. And then I showed people how I did the ear prompter system, and I played clips from my reel, including Super Bowl commercials, daytime soaps, a movie trailer that I just auditioned for, showing I am a massive commodity in this business, and so what? I have to do it a little bit differently. And now I sent this to these 2 guys, just 2 guys, that were in charge of the job that I was going to get. And because this guy 15 years earlier had told me I was bringing a problem to the table. I'd never shared it before. There was no reason to. I did everything I could to hide the fact that I was legally blind. And so that's why this was kind of a scary moment for me. I was afraid that I was going to put this movie out there, or this video out there, and people would look at me differently and treat me differently and maybe not hire me. But I decided I had to do it. I couldn't let this guy run around saying he has a disability, you know, as if I had a fake voice box or something. I mean, he knew what my disability was, but if he was going to put it out there like that, I wanted to clear the air. So I sent this video to these two guys who thought it was awesome. And they put it on Facebook, and they put it on Twitter. And the next thing I know, I was getting calls from ABC, CBS, NBC, Boston Herald, Boston Globe. Al Jazeera called me and wanted to do a story. True. Al Jazeera's New York bureau called me and wanted to do a story on me. I was getting calls from everyone because I was overcoming. That is not something I ever intended to do. As a matter of fact, I was just trying to make some money and to do my job and to do what everybody wants to just get by. And you know, I was never really upset with the fact that I was born with macular degeneration, as rare as it is to get it that young. I was never that upset because I really was going to follow in one of my cousin's footsteps. I looked up to them that much. And Jimmy went to Harvard and he works in business, and Mike went to MIT and he works as an engineer. That's fine. Those are cool professions. I think that's great for both of them. But I get to go into a radio studio and create every day. And that fits me really well. And I found that because of my eyesight. Because I wasn't able to follow them directly, I found my own path. And my own path was really cool. So I wasn't mad at the fact that I had bad eyesight, but there was a certain point at which I would say, okay, God, science, Mickey Mouse, whoever runs the universe these days, listen, I found my path. I know what I'm doing now, and it would be cool to be able to walk into a restaurant and spot my girlfriend from 10 feet away. I'd like to be able to read a menu. I would like to be able to go to the grocery store and pick out the proper pasta as opposed to just guessing and getting the wrong one all the time. I wanted my eyesight back, and I thought that I deserved it because I overcame the challenge that was put in front of me. But that was an extraordinarily myopic view of the world because I'd been hiding my disability for so long and I thought it was all about me. What I didn't realize is what was going to happen after I shared it. Now that video went out on the internet and I started getting emails, phone calls, tweets, texts, Facebooks, not just from those news organizations, but from the people that were watching it. I was getting messages from people all the way over in Saudi Arabia, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Argentina. If there's a country where people were in it, I got contacted if they had internet access. It was unreal. I was shocked. I mean, a couple thousand emails the first 3 or 4 weeks that video is out there. And it wasn't just visually impaired people. There was a quadriplegic in India who told me that his life's dream was to be a stage actor, which obviously seemed really hard to do. But I, without thinking about it, was a guy that wanted to read copy for a living that couldn't read. And this guy said that he was inspired and he was going to go and try and work on that. And I'll tell you, for all the years that I've done voiceovers, at the end of a gig, someone says, nice job. They say, you sounded good. Maybe they'll say, you sounded great. They'll say, you helped sell our product, help promote our show, sound cool. And these are all great compliments. Again, something that you should be very excited to be good at your job and to be getting compliments from the people that you're performing for. It's a very high compliment. But what it didn't compare to is some of the things that happened to me after I released this video. A girl in Argentina got in touch with me. She was a good deal younger than me. I think she was 19. And she had just been diagnosed with some eye disease that was going to start robbing her of her eyesight. And almost the exact same thing happened to her. She told me that the state was coming in, they were going to take care of her, they were going to pull her out of schooling. She was trying to go to college, they were going to yank her out, and they were going to take care of her, put her in a special school, teach her how to find her way around and live in a cocoon world and should be taken care of. Well, she saw my video on YouTube and brought her parents into the room and made them watch it and said, I don't want to drop out of school. I want to find a compensation. I want to find a way. I want to use technology. I want to use my willpower. I want to continue doing what I want to do. This eyesight problem be damned. And that's exactly what I did. And had I not shared the story, maybe this girl would just be in a school off of her path, not doing what she wanted to do. So all of the compliments I ever got for my voiceover career didn't even come close to how I felt and the gift I was given to be able to share to literally change that one person's life. And maybe other people that decided, you know what, it's not the end of the world. I mean, technology's pretty good and people are very strong. And if you know what you want to do, you know, it's going to be hard. It's not easy for anybody to get up and do anything every day, even people with all of their faculties. Everybody's dealing with something. And it's very hard for me to sit back and say, well, I've got the crappy eyesight. I mean, I didn't do it when I was 8. I didn't say Jimmy gets Harvard, Mike gets MIT, and I get sitting at home collecting government checks. I worked hard, harder than everybody else, but the rewards are awesome. The rewards are amazing when you can work and you have a goal and you overcome and you achieve and you get that feeling inside. That is one of the best things that I can do in my life. I appreciate the opportunity to come out and do engagements like this more than I do getting a voiceover job. A voiceover job is cool. It's my career. It's how I make my living. I tie a lot of my self-worth up in it. They say, good job, you do good work, because I work hard at it. But this is rewarding. So no, the point wasn't for me to have an eyesight disease and overcome it. It was to overcome and then be able to come and share. So to all of you here tonight who are listening to me yammer on, I appreciate the opportunity. It means more to me than you'll know to be able to finally share this with people. So thank you so much for having me here.
Any questions for Pete?
Yeah, Pete, did you use Jaws tonight?
Sorry?
Did you use Jaws tonight for this?
You know, I actually, someone had mentioned Jaws to me. I was so out of the loop. I actually just use Windows Narrator. Well, the worse the voice, and I actually went back to the 1995 edition of The Voice because it was so bad. The problem with the new voices is they kind of sound realistic, and when there's a realistic voice, I want to pick up its cadence. So I just use the crappy Windows voice. But I find for occasions like this, I mean, it's my story. If I don't know what I was doing in high school, then I was probably doing something I wasn't supposed to. I will use the prompter for all of my voiceover sessions unless it's short enough I can memorize it. But if I have to go for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, however long I was yapping here, and again, it's just my story. It's just coming out of my head.
Good evening, Pete. This is Bob Hachet. If you listen to EEI, you may know me as Bob from All Family.
Oh, cool.
Called in, and so I've heard a good bit of your voice and a wonderful story, and you know the great thing about justice, and it's great how you were able to overcome and almost get back at this guy. So, do you ever have to deal with this guy anymore that told you however many years ago it was that you weren't going to make it, the one that handed you that big fat document there?
We are obviously it's a small industry, especially at the circles we're running in. He knows what I've done. The story, my story ended up on like the top page of every voiceover community, which was shocking to me. Because again, I was just some guy trying to, do a job. But so many people in the voiceover industry were like, check this guy out, this is so cool. And I know for a fact that I ended up at the top of his news feeds dozens of times. Which, I'm never going to name him. The people that I've never had to say it to people. People know who he is. But you know what? I mean, I can't be that mad. I mean, he was a jerk. He was a total jerk, and he could have worked with me. But he wasn't entirely wrong. I mean, I didn't have an answer for how I was going to do 17 pages. And so, as much as I used him for a little bit of motivation, he wasn't the big evil villain in my story that a lot of people want him to be. I mean, yeah, he was an impetus, but if it wasn't him, it was going to be another guy. I mean, you throw a copy at someone and they say, oh, I can't read it. I mean, that is a problem. So I didn't use him as an I'm going to overcome this as much as I did used me and my inner strength and my family saying I want to overcome this. But at this point, I mean, what he did do, years later saying, Pete's got the disability. I mean, that was a jerk move. And the guy he's a jerk. But, it's the entertainment world. Everybody's a jerk. And he was trying to get a leg up for his client. And my agents work for me. I mean, if they ever did something like that, if they ever went after someone's disability, I'd be pretty peeved. So this guy, yes, he's one of the scummier agents in the world, but no, he wasn't the biggest impetus in my life to succeed. But yeah, I know I've shown up dozens of times in front of him, and I know at a certain point, he's like, enough, I get it. All right, he figured it out, good, he proved me wrong.
Pete, this is Jim Edom. How you doing?
Good.
Really happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
I met you a year or so ago, and I've been following your Twitter feed, and I understand you actually left EEI and now going out on your own. I just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. You're just going on your own venture and doing your own kind of thing for kind of expanding nationally. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd been with EEI. I took the job there right after college. I left for, I didn't want to keep you guys here all night, so I left some stuff out. I did leave for 2 years and went down to New York to work for Sirius Satellite Radio, but even when I was there, I was still working for Dennis and Callahan. So I took my first internship with RKO and EEI when I was 18. I'm now 36, so it was half my life. But the voiceover business was going really well. And I was doing a lot of production work, and I've been picking up sports franchises. I work for the Miami Dolphins, the Philadelphia Eagles, Texas Rangers, the Padres. I'm going to be signing the Colts next month. I do a lot of work for franchises. And working for one radio station and having one salary is good. But working for a bunch of franchises and national brands like Domino's Pizza that I've had the opportunity to work with and dozens of radio stations around the country, the ceiling just started getting higher and higher and higher. So I had to sit down one day and say, make a really tough decision. I mean, EEI and RKO, the hardest thing is that's been my identity. When I go to a party, when Maggie and I go somewhere and we meet people, what do? I'm always like, yeah, I got the cool job. I work in radio, and people know EEI and RKO. But I had to put that aside and figure out what I wanted to do for a living. And being tied to one radio station, and EEI is a beast of work. I mean, it's like every time I turn around, another Boston sports team is in the finals, which is great if you're a fan, but if you're me, it's a pain in the ass. Because every day it's another promotion. Something else, Giant Glass now wants to sponsor the promo, and now ARS Restoration Specialist wants to be in the promo. I'm like, but I already made the promo. Well, you got to put them in there. And then every time there's a game, you have to make a set of promos. If they win, if they lose. And I found I was spending a huge portion of my day feeding this beast that was EEI, when I could take that time to go out and market myself and find other opportunities, and like I said, just keep pushing that ceiling up and up and up. So to walk out on a job that was paying a good salary, that gave me all my benefits, health, I mean, these things you have to deal with in life, was an extraordinarily difficult decision. But so far it's working out really well. That time that I spent making the lose versions of the promos when they'd never run because I was supposed to be making the win version, I've spent making these relationships with teams like the Royals and Padres and started working with them. So it's really been working out well. And you're never really your own boss. I mean, everybody's always answering to someone. So I can't say I'm my own boss. Now I have like 78 bosses that are all calling me all the time. But it's extremely rewarding, and especially knowing, I mean, at the beginning of the story, when I was 13 or 12 and my voice changed, knowing that I want to be a voiceover guy, to wake up in the morning and say, I'm a voiceover guy. I mean, it's a very rewarding experience. A difficult choice, but I'm glad I made it.
One more question.
We're good. Thank you very much.